Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Josie's Point of View, where we focus on human interest stories from the Carolinas and beyond. Today it's Tuesday and it's February the 15th, 2022. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new to my channel, I'd like to extend to you a warm welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. And if you're a returning viewer, by all means, thank you for coming back. You know, I always say the tide changes so frequently here on these YouTube streets, so you always have to acknowledge where your support comes from. And I want you to know I sincerely thank you for your support. Feel free to like and to share this video, and don't forget to subscribe. And our story today comes from the city of Fayetteville here in North Carolina. Take a look at the headline. And it reads, the Ramsey Street rapist sentenced to 22 years in prison. I'll provide you with a summary here, and as always, I'll place links to a few of the full articles in the description box. Well, if you are of a certain age and you've been a resident of Fayetteville for some time, you just might remember the terror many of the local women experienced when a series of rapes were taking place in one geographic area and the police seemed unable to find the person responsible for committing those crimes. All of the sexual assaults were taking place within an area known as the Ramsey Street corridor, and at some point it was determined that all of the assaults were being conducted by the same person, and the person conducting the crimes was dubbed the Ramsey Street Rapist. Now, I remember all too well what was taking place back then. Women were being told to take extra precautions by making sure the doors and windows were locked, especially if you lived on a lower level apartment. Some women talked about arming themselves. They were taking self-defense classes, and women were also told to pay attention to our surroundings while walking and while getting in and out of our cars and so forth. The most troubling part of what was taking place back then is that for 10 years, the victims lived in fear, not knowing if that person was close by or if he would return. Now, one of the victims was a military spouse, and she eventually did tell the story about how she was sexually assaulted. She stated her husband was deployed at the time, and on that particular day, her 2 children were sleeping in another room. The woman said, with her husband being gone, when she realized someone else was in the condo, she thought maybe her husband had returned and was trying to surprise her, but that was not the case. She was indeed sexually assaulted, and then the rapist, he threatened to harm her children if she ever reported the incident. So she kept silent for a while. And what was quite interesting is as he left through the window, he reminded her to lock the doors and the window to prevent somebody else from getting in. Now, the rapist did leave evidence behind, and the police were able to collect DNA samples from various locations inside of the rooms where the sexual assaults took place, as well as on door handles. And even with all that information, the police were still having difficulty solving this case because they could not find a DNA match. And for several years, this case remained unsolved. It remained unsolved for a decade. But eventually the crime stopped and nothing was being said about the cases, and it seemed like life just went on and things just got back to normal. But things aren't always as they seem, and police don't always tell you everything that they're doing. But behind the scene, they never lost sight of that DNA evidence, and they continue to pursue leads in an effort to solve this case and find that Ramsey Street rapist. And eventually, they got a break. Yes, they eventually got the break they were looking for. Now, they already had its DNA from various locations at the sites where the sexual assaults took place, and thank God they had preserved that evidence because police were able to find a match with the DNA from the crime scene, and they were able to match it to a genealogy DNA sample that was submitted by a relative, and this was through a process known as genetic genealogy testing. The match led police to a person of interest, and so the Ramsey Street rapist finally had an identity. His name is Darold Bowden, and based on what police later found out, this person was within their reach all along, and this is several pictures from his different mugshots. He was in their reach all along because he had been committing crimes and he had been arrested many times. One news source found that this man had 74 criminal filings, so he was no stranger to law enforcement. Yes, as shocking as it may seem, this man was indeed a career criminal, and he had been arrested numerous times. And based on what has been reported by News 17, he would be arrested, and then a few months later, a rape is committed, then he would be arrested again, and the same pattern was seen over and over and over again. So he was never in hiding. He was living in the area in plain sight. And you might say, how is it he was arrested so many times? I just mentioned that 74 times was cited by a news source. So he had 74 felonies, and you're probably saying, how is it that he could be arrested this many times and still the police could not identify him as the person committing those sexual assaults? Well, it's quite simple. The crimes he was repeatedly being arrested for are considered felonies, and under the current law, they do not meet the criteria for DNA sample collection. Imagine that. Dozens of crimes, and yet he does not meet any criteria for being entered into a DNA database. Just shocking to me. Doesn't make any sense. But last week, there was a bit of justice for the victims because after what may have been very lengthy plea negotiations, Bowden appeared in court and pled guilty to 24 charges, some of them for rape and some of them for burglary, and he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. And there's a need for clarification here because I saw some news sources saying that he pled guilty to 24 charges of rape. No, there were 24 charges total that he pled guilty to. Some of them are rape and some of them were burglary, and he was sentenced to 22 years. The district attorney spoke after the sentences and said this plea negotiation was probably the best solution because it prevented the victims from having to face a lengthy trial where they would have to testify and to relive the torture they suffered a decade ago. At least he's going to jail for a very long time. And many of the victims are now speaking out in an effort to be advocates for change. And a common theme that has emerged is that this man should never have been allowed to roam the streets of Fayetteville. It calls into question the system of law that does not take into consideration the numerous felonies committed by an accused and recognize that that individual is a risk to the community. Had he been directed to provide a DNA sample, these rapes could have been solved a long time ago. Makes you wonder how many of them could have been prevented. But I don't think this is the end of the story. But I'll stay on top of this and I'll bring you updates as they become available. And that's all I have for you right now. Feel free to leave me a comment below and let me know what you think about this video. And by all means, feel free to like it and to share it. And if you haven't done so already, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel by clicking on that red subscribe button. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click on this notification bell right here, you'll be the first to know whenever a new video is uploaded. I thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.